Today I want to zero in on what makes the Hector vs Achilles fight from the movie Troy so unforgettable. From the framing to the choreography, the visual language is working together to reinforce so much about both characters and the narrative. For those that don't know, the Hector vs Achilles fight is a climactic showdown that takes place towards the end of Troy. The fight is driven by personal loss and the relentless pursuit of honor.
You will wander the underworld blind, deaf, and dumb, and all the dead will know. This is Hector, the fool who thought he killed Achilles.
Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Greeks, fights for glory and vengeance after his cousin Patroclus is killed in battle, mistakenly at the hands of Hector, the noble prince of Troy. He challenges Hector to a one-on-one duel outside the gates of Troy, seeking both justice and retribution for his cousin. Hector is the polar opposite of Achilles, an honorable man and dutiful leader who fights to protect his city and loved ones. Whereas Achilles is a relentless warrior driven by glory and immortality, a man fueled by ego, pride, and the desire to etch his name into history. These two contrasting character traits perfectly set the stage for the duel between the two men. Up until this point, Hector has proven himself a formidable warrior, a strategic leader who charges into battle alongside his men, commanding respect through both skill and intellect. Achilles, on the other hand, is a force of nature. He doesn't fight battles, he ends them. Every opponent he's faced so far has fallen within seconds, showcasing a level of dominance that feels almost mythic in nature. This mythic quality is crucial to understanding his character and the fight itself. Much like how Peter Jackson framed The Lord of the Rings as a medieval legend rooted in the distant past, Troy presents Achilles not as an untouchable demigod, but as a man operating at the peak of human potential. This portrayal makes him feel more real, more human, and ironically, more legendary. As a result, the fight feels less like a duel between man and demigod, but instead a fight between two elite warriors. The scene begins with the gate of Troy opening. We get a dolly forward pushing right into Hector's face. This dramatic shift from wide to close-up, paired with the music and the sound of the heavy creaky door, highlights the moment from Hector's perspective. The weight and dread of facing Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior. It's a simple yet effective visual and auditory cue that allows the audience to feel Hector's emotional state and the gravity of the moment. This is only further emphasized by the next cut, which features my favorite shot of the sequence, an over-the-shoulder shot from Hector's perspective, staring out at Achilles, who stands waiting for him. The frame is wide and empty, and one might assume that, in any other context, this composition would make Achilles appear small and weak. But in this context, from Hector's perspective, Achilles seems enormous. The emptiness of the landscape serves to isolate Achilles, making him the only focus in Hector's line of sight. Achilles holds all the power in this moment. This simple shot, which could have easily been framed tighter to show more of Achilles' face, works perfectly to underscore both the narrative and the personal stakes for Hector. As Hector walks down to meet Achilles, they exchange dialogue about the events that led to this moment. The use of close-ups during this exchange emphasizes the gravity of their words, focusing on the intensity and the weight of what's being said.
Let us pledge that the winner will allow the loser all the proper funeral rituals.
There are no pacts between lions and men.
Achilles and Hector both remove their helmets, a choice that is directly tied to the narrative. Hector killed Patroclus, thinking he was Achilles, as the helmet concealed his face, but it's also a brilliant storytelling decision. By revealing their faces, the fight is stripped down to just two men, their emotions and expressions.
Now you know who you're fighting.
After this, there's no formal unsheathing of swords or ceremonial stances. Achilles takes the first step towards Hector, initiating the fight entirely on his own terms. From this moment, Achilles dictates the flow of the battle, setting the tone and the pace that will persist throughout. As I mentioned before, Achilles is portrayed in the movie as a man at the peak of human potential, and it's this quality that defines his fighting style in this duel. While Hector is a formidable warrior fighting for his life, with every move driven by urgency and survival, Achilles moves with a very calculated confidence. The choreography of this fight emphasizes just how dominant Achilles is compared to Hector. While his movements are undoubtedly human, there's an almost divine quality to them. His combat prowess is so exceptional that it feels like he's on the cusp of transcending human limitations. I want to point out a moment to me that clearly highlights Achilles' superiority over Hector. At around 40 seconds into the fight, Achilles is realizing that Hector isn't falling as quickly as other warriors he has faced. This moment marks a shift in the fight, as Achilles is is forced to adjust, indicating that Hector is unlike anyone he's encountered before. Pay attention to what Achilles does with his shield before abandoning it. He raises it above his head and positions it in line with the vertical axis of his body. This shift in stance allows him to stay vertically balanced, allowing him to strike in a full 180-degree arc with his sword. This moment feels like a transition in the fight, a second act of sorts, with the first act having ended when the swords are unsheathed. In most sword fights on screen, the combatants typically trade blows in a repetitive back and forth until one finally gains the upper hand. Their fighting styles remain static, with victory only coming when one makes a mistake. But in this fight, Achilles does something different. He adapts. It's almost as if Achilles is trying every tactic he knows on Hector. What further emphasizes this shift is the dramatic push-in on Achilles' face just before this sequence. It's as if he's trying to engage more of his intellect in the fight rather than simply relying on raw warrior instincts. While he isn't shaken, there's a noticeable pause in his demeanor, a moment where he reassesses and adjusts his approach. The speed of the push-in shot mirrors the quickness of Achilles' thoughts, reinforcing that he's now strategically adapting rather than just relying on his most basic approach. The scene is littered with these small but telling details. Though subtle and happening quickly, they compound further to highlight Achilles' overwhelming superiority over Hector, further adding to his mythic yet grounded characterization. One thing worth noting in this fight is the camera as a whole. The choice to shoot the majority of the scene with a static camera rather than a handheld shaky one only helps to reinforce the idea that Achilles is in complete control. The locked off camera gives a sense of clarity, power and grandness. Most of the shots are wide, allowing us to follow the action effortlessly. All this helps to mirror Achilles' calculated control over the fight, with all his moves appearing crisp and deliberate. I'll add a shaky camera effect to parts of the fight so you can see the difference it makes. Let me know if it feels right for a duel like this. Now, the majority of the fight is shot at eye level, which suggests that both men are on equal footing. However, every time Achilles performs his famous jump and stab move, the camera drops to a low angle, looking up at the attack. While this could easily be done simply for dramatic effect, I believe this low angle adds to the move's impact. It's something to be feared as we look up at it, subtly enhancing an Achilles' almost otherworldly fighting style. As the fight progresses, the tension builds, and we find ourselves completely glued to the screen. The standout moment comes when Hector manages to slash Achilles' armor, and Achilles pauses, stunned by the strike. This moment is another brilliant piece of characterization, highlighting the mystery of the character and how no opponent has ever come this close to harming him before. Now, I won't break down the entire edit, but I should say that the editing throughout the entire fight is flawless. We're never confused about who is where or what they're doing. One standout choice, which I will bring attention to, is the extreme wide shot right before Achilles delivers the final strike that kills Hector. This cut gives the audience a moment to breathe, almost like a calm before the storm. It's also the first extreme wide shot we've seen during the fight, which on an unconscious level signals that something significant is about to happen. It builds anticipation and allows us to emotionally prepare for Hector's death, rather than staying tight on the action and letting the strike happen without warning. Achilles drives the spear tip into Hector's chest, forcing him to his knees. Then comes the iconic finishing move. Achilles steps back, steadies himself and lunges forward with a theatrical precision, driving his sword into Hector and bringing the fight to its brutal end. I genuinely believe this ranks as one of the best choreographed sword fights in cinema. What makes it timeless isn't just the skillful combat or the raw intensity, it's the story being told through every moment. This isn't just two elite warriors clashing swords, it's a clash of ideals, motivations and character. On an unconscious level, I think we as the audience feel it. We see Hector, the honourable prince, who accepts his fate but still faces it head-on with dignity. And we see Achilles, the prideful, almost mythical warrior, driven by vengeance and glory. The battle for Troy was waged by thousands, but in this moment, it all comes down to these two men. Their fight becomes a microcosm of the larger war, duty versus pride, mortality versus legacy. And that, I think, is why this fight still holds so much weight. It's not just great choreography, it's great storytelling in motion. It reminds us that sometimes the most powerful battles aren't fought with armies, but with purpose.